I scream at myself when there's nobody else to fight. I don't lose, I don't win. If I'm wrong, then I'm halfway right. Used to get high with the dead end kids.
Welcome into the OBR Straight Talk podcast. Once again, I am your host, Jared Mueller. You can get a hold of me on Twitter at Jared K. Mueller, and you can find all of our work at theobr.com, the Orange and Brown Report, a part of 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Network. So I opened the show with another Linkin Park song. This time, the song is called Halfway Right. And at some level, I'd like to say that I was halfway right about the Cleveland Browns versus the Los Angeles Rams in my podcast preview. I told you how the game was going to be close. Most of us, if we were being honest, with all of the injuries in the defense and the struggles that the offense had shown in the first 2 weeks, really probably didn't expect the Browns to be in that game. It's probably why some of you and some of us are more frustrated than we should be for a close game against the team that was in the Super Bowl last year and hasn't, it's not that they went to the Super Bowl and then got torn down. This is pretty much the same team that went to the Super Bowl last year, minus some players like Ndamukong Suh, but still full of a lot of talent. The talent that made it to the Super Bowl, and the Browns were able to make this a game. I think there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to talk about that are negative, and they've been talked about and they've been focused on, and really in the span of 48 hours have really been beat over the head, and that's okay. This is what happens when expectations are a part of Cleveland Browns football. It's really strange, right? I'll actually probably write an article a little bit for the OBR subscribers, just talking about how expectations are huge, right? Think about the Cleveland Indians, who are currently playing right now, and Jose Ramirez just hit a grand slam. Think about the Cleveland Indians. Their expectations, or the fans' expectations of the Indians, were very, very high. And the Minnesota Twins somehow became a real team and a team that hits lots of home runs, and all of a sudden, the Indians' 90-some win season could be meaningless, right? So think of if you didn't have high expectations, or you thought the Indians could be good, and they won 90-some games. They're they're in the vicinity of 100 games, right? Of a 100-win season. They're in that vicinity. They're between 90 and 100 wins this season. And yet they could miss the playoffs, or they could be knocked out in a one-game wild card. All of that is possible. And again, the expectations decide whether that is a successful season or not. I think if you were a Twins fan and you literally just changed the records, right? So the Twins or the Indians were winning the division, and the Twins didn't have a chance, but were winning 90-some games and still competing for that wild card spot with whatever amount of games they have left, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, whatever that number is. Well, that would have been seen as a successful season for the Twins, but because the Indians had higher expectations, so far, at least as we're seeing it right now, many people feel disappointed. They feel disappointed because some of the decisions made in the offseason, lots of things play a role in that, but they still feel disappointed because of expectations. Well, the Browns have expectations, and so all of the struggles, all of the difficulties, all of the problems will be put under a microscope. But first, let's talk about the positives. The defense did exactly what I said they needed to do, and that's control the game with their front four and their front seven, and mix things up on the back end. They did a great job of it. Not everything was perfect, but again, no team plays a perfect game. It just doesn't happen. But the defense controlled the game. So even though the offense had less injuries and less problems, the defense was without their four in the secondary starters, Christian Kirksey as a starter. They were down 5 starters, but they needed to control this game, and they did. I will say the crowd played a big role. They made it difficult for Jared Goff to hear Sean McVay in his helmet. They caused some problems with snaps and getting plays in, lots of different things. But the defense impressed. And so what that tells us is that this defense, as they get healthy, at least against a team that is as potent and powerful as the Rams, does have an opportunity to be amazing. They have an opportunity to be amazing while the offense continues to struggle. And so as the offense struggles, the defense impresses even with a ton of injuries. And just a little bit, we're going to have Brandon Bowers on to kind of close out the second half of the show. Dr. Bowers works for Athletico and is a physical therapy guy. And so he's going to talk to us a little bit about injuries and those kind of things. It's kind of his side job, working for CBS Sports as well as a part of Sportsline. So we'll have Dr. Bowers on to talk about injuries, but the defense overcame the injuries. The offense couldn't overcome their struggles. Whether that struggle was Todd Monken, Freddie Kitchens, Baker Mayfield. Really, we're not even mentioning the offensive line this week, which is probably a good sign. The Browns offense couldn't get it all together. They couldn't get it all figured out. They just couldn't. It didn't happen. And so as we go into this really important week 4, we know that the Browns offense probably isn't all of a sudden going to have it all figured out. So they're going to have to rely on the defense, maybe some explosive plays like we saw in Monday Night Football against the Jets with OBJ taking that slant to the house. Maybe the run game, maybe turnovers for the defense. The Browns offense is unlikely to all of a sudden just flip a switch. But the good news is that everything they need is in place. The offensive line is coming together, still has the opportunity of possibly transitioning to Wyatt Teller at right guard. But to be honest, Eric Kush hasn't been a huge problem at right guard there. So McCray did fine in place of Chris Hubbard. Who knows if he's the best option for the Browns right now at right tackle. And then we know what talent is on the field. We also know that Freddie Kitchens has the ability to call a creative, interesting game plan. We know he has that ability. We know it is possible. And he has the talent to do it. So, are they trying to figure each other out? Absolutely. Is Monken and Kitchens trying to figure things out? Absolutely. Do the players have input? Absolutely. Now, does that mean they will certainly get it right? I honestly have no idea. We cannot predict that. And that's tough. And so because we cannot predict that, what most people want today is change. They want to trade for Trent Williams. They want Todd Monken to take over the play calling. They want this. They want that. Whatever it is, because we cannot guarantee development, because that's a rocky road that tends to be non-linear. It's not a straight line. It kind of goes up and down, and we have no certainty to it. What we do have possible certainty to is if change happens. So for many people, the idea is that change, whether it's a trade, a new offensive coordinator, whatever it is, the idea is that that is going to kind of elevator. So it's going to go from whatever floor they think it's on now up a few floors almost automatically and immediately. The team. That's what people believe a change does. The problem is a change takes time to get to work, to make everything get together. And so when Freddie Kitchens says giving play calling over to Todd Monken isn't feasible, at some level, he might be right, because that change isn't just a quick elevator ride and all of a sudden we go from where we are to where we want to be. It may even set the team back farther, right? Adding a new player, all that goes with that. And if you add that player, do you move Greg Robinson? So if you add Trent Williams, do you move Greg Robinson? If you move Greg Robinson, do you move Chris Hubbard inside? What do you do, right? So you have all this possible movement happening. And at the same time, everybody else still has to develop. Everybody else still has to adjust. That non-linear development thing still has to happen. So if all of that is going on, we just have to be realistic, folks. And that is that the offense has all the tools necessary to be successful. The coaching staff has shown the ability to be successful. Todd Monken has been successful pretty much wherever he's went from an offensive perspective. Freddie Kitchens was successful last year in his 8 games, and that's what got him the job. So for the Browns right now, it's not a surprise that the defense needs to carry the team and the offense needs to figure it out. But that has to happen. The coaching staff really has kind of hung their hat on trying to do what's best with the players that they have. So instead of implementing their system, quote unquote, they really are trying to implement what they think the players will do best. And that takes time. Would it have helped to play in preseason? I don't know. Based on the injuries that we're dealing with, would we have dealt with more? Would more players be out for the year or on IR, possibly to return? Would there be more soft tissue? I don't know. It's why I'm bringing on Dr. Brandon Bowers here in just a second for you, is to talk a little bit about that. He's not going to have answers about these specific players because he's not caring for these players, but he cares for athletes. He works with athletes. He understands the body. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So could the coaching staff do things differently? Sure. They're always learning. Bill Belichick should still be learning. Bill Belichick is doing things differently today than he was last year at this time. It's just a reality. Learning always should be happening. And for a coaching staff who is focused really on the players and teaching versus direct implementation of their system, right? It's what we saw from Hugh Jackson and tons of other people where the system was more important than the players. Well, Freddie Kitchens, Todd Monken, the rest of the staff are really trying to figure out how they can fit a system around the talents of their players. And that really, to me, is why they should create a good coaching staff, why they should be able to get this all figured out, and why this should go well. Thankfully, they have a defense that they can rely on. I think Steve Wilkes is figuring out how to use his players best. And in that, last week, we saw a lot of zone defense that we didn't see in week 1 and week 2. Well, that's what happens when you're down your starting defensive secondary, basically. Right? Terrence Mitchell, TJ Carey, they're starters at some level, or could be starters, but you're down 4 starters in your secondary and one of your starting linebackers. You're down 5 of your 11 defensive starters. You got to get a little creative. Got to get a little different. If Ward and Williams are back, if Demarius Randall is back, like we saw today, it looks like he will be. If Morgan Burnett is back, if all of those things happen, probably goes back to more week 1 and 2, where we saw more man, some zone, all of those kind of things. So as a whole, while the coaching staff itself has not been overly impressive, there's a lot that we at least have seen about them that gives us hope that they can get this stuff fixed. And then, if the defense stays good, and the offense gets clicking, and the schedule gets easier, like I talked about on the last podcast, all of a sudden, even if the Browns only have 2 or 3 wins after week 8, suddenly they still have 7 games against bad teams that they should win. They have another 2 games that they could win. So if the Browns can get 1 or 2 more victories, whether that's this week against the Ravens and be tied for first place, or against the Seattle Seahawks, or against the San Francisco 49ers, or against the New England Patriots, I only need 1 or 2 wins out of that to tell you I think this Browns team is winning 9 or 10 games, because they'll get it figured out. That's my promise. I believe this team will get it figured out. What I don't know is how the injuries, the ones we know and the ones we don't know yet, can impact it. So for that, I brought on Brandon Bowers. Dr. Brandon Bowers works for Athletico, and after this little musical interlude, we'll bring Brandon in. We'll talk about what he does, football injuries in general, and then we'll talk through some of the Browns injuries of note. That right after this. And folks, as we promised, I am now here with Dr. Brandon Bowers. Brandon, how are you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing really well. Just sitting here, got the Indians game on in the background as they make a late playoff push, and ready to chat about some Browns injuries with you.
Yeah, it's exciting as an injury guy with Jose Ramirez. First came back, first at bat back, grand slam. So, people can come back from injuries and do well, which is nice to hear. So, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Bowers is with Sportsline, as seen his articles on CBS. And he's also a part of the Fantasy Doctors, which is a group of surgeons, docs, and physical therapists just talking about fantasy sports and injuries and how those all relate, as well as working for Athletico. And so, Brandon, can you just give the kind of the listeners a little bit of background on how long you've been working with injuries and athletes and what that has looked like, and then your work then with Sportsline and the Fantasy Doctors?
Absolutely, Jared. I've been a doctor of physical therapy now for going on 3 years with Athletico, as you've mentioned. We're based out of Chicago, Illinois, but the practice that I'm currently at is on the northeast side of Columbus, Ohio, in New Albany. And I see a wide range of athletes, ranging in ages from the youth level all the way through the professional level. I've seen a couple of guys who have gone through Major League Baseball, a couple NBA guys at our practice. So I really do see the gambit of things. With regards to the injury analysis side of things, this really started for me a couple years back, just on a voluntary basis for Indians Baseball Insider, discussing injuries to Indians players, return to play timetables, and expectations for these guys when they're able to come back to play. And that's really blossomed over the past couple of years. As you mentioned, I'm now with CBS Sports and Sportsline, as well as the Fantasy Doctors. And really, my role on social media is to bring fans a closer look to what these injuries are and what the implications are. And so if there's ever a question about what an injury is or how long it's going to take a guy to come back, I'm there to fill that void. And it's really something I've been passionate about doing in addition to my clinical work really the past couple of years.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I would say, my interactions with Dr. Bowers on Twitter really has been helping me understand something that is, I know what it's like for me to twist an ankle, but I don't know anything more than that. And I know how long it can be sore for me and those kind of things. So having someone who likes sports, loves sports, but also professionally works with athletes and understands it, and obviously has gone to school for a long time, but can explain it to us in a way that, we understand. I don't need to know about the 75 different bones in the foot. Again, I have no idea how many bones are in the foot. I don't need to know all those details, but it's really been helpful for me to understand for the teams that I cover and root for, as well as for fantasy football and other sports. What does it mean for me? What is that practical application? What should I expect? What should I see? And so that's really been a great resource for everybody on Twitter. And obviously it's why Sportsline, CBS, and the Fantasy Doctors have brought you on. So I just appreciate you, Brandon, giving us an opportunity to understand this stuff better than he's just out. That's great. He's just out. But what does that mean? How long could it look like? What's the worst case scenario? And then when he comes back, what could that look like? So I just appreciate that from you, because it's made my coverage of the teams better, as well as some of my fantasy stuff better in the past. So I just appreciate that because you dumb it down for us. So that's always nice. So I'm gonna give a disclaimer, and then Dr. Bowers, if you need to add anything to this, please do so. But as a mental health professional, you guys know that oftentimes you hear disclaimers from me, because when we work in the field, I think it's always important to make very, very clear certain things. So before Dr. Bowers and I kind of talk through some of these things, and specifically some of the players, I want to make sure to put the disclaimer out there that Dr. Bowers is not giving any type of medical recommendations. He has not examined these players in any way, shape, or form, nor does he know anything about these players. So he's not violating HIPAA in any way, shape, or form. This is just him talking through the information that is available to everybody using his specialty, the same way when I talked about Josh Gordon and marijuana, or Johnny Manziel and some of his issues. I was talking about those guys based on the information we all had publicly and my professional experience, licensure, and those kind of things. So that's just kind of a disclaimer. I don't want anybody to think that Dr. Bowers is giving them any type of recommendation for injuries, or sharing any information that is a violation of any kind of confidentiality or any of those kind of things. Did I cover it okay for you on your side, Brandon?
You hit the nail on the head. Really, the big thing is I have not evaluated these players and these injuries in person on my own. These players are all under the care of the Browns medical team and medical staff. So this is just all based off my clinical experience and the information, as you mentioned, that's provided publicly and what I would typically see in clinic if this patient or this athlete were to walk into my office.
Perfect. Absolutely. So I always, want to protect people. Same way I like that people protect me. So, Brandon, as we look just in general, when you look at your history with football injuries, what are some things that you look for as you're working with players? You call them patients, those kind of things. What are some things you look for in how they are dealing with their injuries, recovering from the injuries, some of those kind of things? What are some of the things that jump out that you tend to focus on most? And I know that's a very broad and general question on purpose. What are some of the things that you tend to focus on as you're helping players overcome injuries, deal with injuries, and maybe prevent injuries in the future?
Yeah, one of the big things comes before the injuries even happen, and that's the preventative side of things. There's a lot of good research studies that have come out across a variety of different sports, just detailing the importance of injury prevention programs. And so these are programs that are put in place by medical professionals in conjunctions with coaches and teams to work on strength, to work on mobility, and work on movements to prevent these types of injuries. So when we see individuals who have gotten hurt, there's oftentimes a correlation that there wasn't some sort of preventative medicine or prehab in place. And so we definitely see that. And it's definitely something that we're making a push for to try and get more coaches and more teams on board with to hopefully reduce the risk of injury by getting ahead of the game, getting these kids stronger ahead of time so then they're not running into the injury bug later on down the line. After we see somebody who gets hurt, there really is a lot of coaching from a physical standpoint and the clinical side of things, but then the psychological side, which I mean, you with your background in mental health can probably speak to this a little bit. The psychological side is just as important. I mean, I see kids who come in all the time who have torn up their ACL playing football or playing basketball, what have you, have surgery, and then they're down for the next year or so. And this really is a blow to them mentally and emotionally because to them, they identify I'm a basketball player or I'm a football player. And when they don't have that and that's taken away, it can really make things pretty tough for them. So just making sure that there's an emphasis both on the physical and then the psychological side of things are equally important.
That's awesome. Yeah, and what I heard from you is, and there's more obviously, but the combination of things like strength training and flexibility and those kind of things, it's not an either or thing. It's a both and I think too many times we hear people talk about lots of things and we they talk about them as either or, but the reality is it's both and more, right? It's nutrition, it's all of those kind of things. What about, and again, you're not giving any type of clinical recommendations, but what about all these different supplements that we see? Is that something that for athletes that supplements, again, whether it's the creatines of the world or I take glucosamine chondroitin because I have back and hip issues and all kinds of other medical issues related to my bones. Do you guys think those kind of supplements, just in general, are helpful for athletes, or are those more just kind of add-ons that they can pay money for? They might help a little bit, but really it's back to those base things of strength and stretching and some of that kind of stuff.
You see both sides of things. There are definitely some supplements out there that are beneficial to the body and that can be used safely and effectively in conjunction with a normal diet and a normal workout routine. And so there is a place for those. What you'll run into sometimes are some of the things that you'll see maybe on an infomercial plugging this new supplement or this new pill that claims to do whatever it does. And it's just more of a money grab than anything. So it's important when teams, and obviously they have top of the line medical staff, dietary staff who controls these types of things. It's important that they are able to accurately sift through these things and determine, okay, which of these things falls into the bucket that's going to be beneficial for these athletes, and which one of these things is more of a money grab where they're just trying to make a buck and may not be quite as beneficial. So nutrition and dietary supplements are very important and part of the process with the strength, with the flexibility, the range of motion, and the normal training regimen. It's just a matter of just doing the due diligence and determining what is beneficial and what's not necessary.
Sounds good. I think too many times for people like myself who wish they were in better shape but are also significantly lazy at times, that looking for those supplements that are going to give me energy so that I'll want to work out but there's no crash, and and they're healthy somehow, and then they'll burn fat at the same time as lowering my cholesterol. We look for those things, we want those things, but I think we see those things more on the infomercials than we do in anything else. And again, it's that holistic approach which I appreciate about kind of your discussion of athletes and their bodies and injuries. The last thing before we get into specific Browns injuries is we see a lot of Browns fans and fans in general really talking about types of players or certain people being more susceptible to injuries. Again, whether that's based on, for example, Denzel Ward and his frame and his size, or taller, shorter, bigger, skinnier, all of those kind of things. In your understanding and your research, is there significant susceptibility, especially maybe in the NFL or football, to players based on things that are measurable?
When we look at size, height, weight, strength, there really isn't a whole lot of literature and a whole lot of research out there that says somebody who is 6'1" and weighs 275 pounds is going to be at more of a risk for an ankle sprain than somebody who's shorter or skinnier. That information just isn't out there. What we do see, though, is individuals who have sustained some of these injuries previously, and this is the case with any injury. For example, a hamstring injury is going to be more susceptible to sustain another one than somebody who hasn't. So although conventional wisdom would lead us to think that maybe a specific body type or body frame, height, weight, what have you, will lead somebody to be more susceptible to an injury, the information just isn't out there and doesn't show that correlation. So I mean, you'd think that it would, but as of right now, the data suggests otherwise.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, we can look at people who are more susceptible because of previous injuries. So you're more likely to re-injure something because it was weakened, or other people who compensate. So because of my leg surgeries may have caused some of the issues for my scoliosis, or my buddy who had a left knee injury in surgery, I believe it was MCL, later, shortly thereafter, when he was able to actually start to move, overcompensated and tore his Achilles. There are some of those things that we can look at individual players, but holistically body types and those kind of things, prone to injury is not really something you can see. The only thing is, much like gambling, we can't always say, but it's helpful that history can help us possibly predict the future. Is that a good way of shortening that?
It definitely does. And as you mentioned with your case and your friend's case, when you have a history of one injury, there's going to be some sort of compensation where other parts of the body have to pick up the slack for the deficient body part. And sometimes that can result in a subsequent injury. You mentioned the MCL, and then the Achilles is a perfect example. We've got a knee that's not functioning in its full capacity. So somewhere else in the body is going to have to pick up the load until that knee is back to its full function. And sometimes it does result in some of those significant injuries, in that case, an Achilles tear. So there definitely is a correlation.
Yeah, and I think you talked about the whole idea of, I am a football player, I am a basketball player. I think one of the things that professional athletes need to worry about, and teams really need to try to take control of, or is, these people see themselves, this is their job, this is who they are, this is what they do, and the willingness to wait, right? To wait till they're actually ready, so that hamstring strain doesn't become a hamstring tear, which is the same body part, or the hamstring strain on the right side doesn't cause a different problem on the left side, those kind of things. I think that's where, again, you talked about the mental and the physical coming together. I think that's going to be a really important piece for some of these players that we're about to talk about, is, are they willing to set aside their identity and their need to play in order to make sure they're healthy? And is the team trainer, the medical staff, all of those people able to help them understand why that's important? So hopefully they're able to do that, because obviously that's hard. You want to be there for your teammates, you want to be there for your team, your city, all of those kind of things, but you also put yourself at more risk at some level if you're not fully healed. So hopefully Browns don't have that experience with some of these guys we're going to talk about. So we'll start with Christian Kirksey. The basic public information is he has a chest injury. The belief is that it is a torn pec. Let's just assume it is. We don't know for sure. So actually, obviously, Dr. Bowers, you're not saying he has a torn pec, but if Christian Kirksey does have a torn pec, what could that look like for his recovery? Is there a chance he could be back? It's only going into week 4 of the NFL season. Is there a chance he could be back? And if not, what does his future look like coming back from that torn pec?
I hate to be the bearer of bad news if it is in fact a torn pec. He would require surgery, and that would effectively end his season. The pec obviously is the muscle. It's located on the front side of the chest and is a very important muscle when it comes to movement of the arms and pushing and pulling and tackling, especially for a linebacker. And so when that muscle is torn and surgery is required, there it needs to be adequate time for that muscle to heal and kind of return back to its normal state. And unfortunately, this can be upwards of a 6 month process. And so that being said, he would be done for the year. He's a guy that just can't seem to stay healthy. I was talking with somebody the other day that it seems like every year he's getting ready to roll out there and poised for a big season, and then something happens. So again, there hasn't been any official confirmation that it is a torn pec yet, but if he did tear his pec, surgery would be the course of action, and then he should be good to go for the start of next season. But just an unfortunate blow for a key player on that defense for the Cleveland Browns.
Absolutely. And so we're going to look and see what Mac Wilson has, and then some obviously more time for Sione Takitaki. And it looks like Kirksey, obviously he's on the IR right now. The good thing in the NFL is you no longer have to designate someone for return until you decide who of the players you want, the two that you want to allow to return. So just because Kirksey is on the IR does not mean he cannot return this year. But it sounds like, again, if the general information we think is true, which we don't know and it hasn't been confirmed, is a torn pec, it's unlikely that we'll see Christian Kirksey. And then Browns fans, with salary cap and contract and everything that goes with it, as well as drafting two linebackers this year, the odds that we see Christian Kirksey back in a Cleveland Browns uniform is a lot lower than we think. And so there could be some longtime Cleveland players, Christian Kirksey, Jason Kipnis for the Indians, that are no longer donning the uniforms that we have seen them in Cleveland all of their professional careers. So Christian Kirksey looks like most likely out. We just got reports today about David Njoku, the Browns starting tight end, that he will not be requiring surgery on his wrist. And so that's an interesting development. Many people assume that was going to be a surgery, but Mary Kay Cabot is reporting that. Again, we don't know for sure. But looking at that, Dr. Bowers, when you look at Njoku, the wrist information that we have and the possibility of not having surgery, what could that mean for his return? And what could be some concerns if he does return this year without having surgery?
Yeah, so the big thing to look at here, because surgery wasn't indicated, just tells us that the location and the severity of this fracture did not involve any movement or shifting of the bones. Oftentimes, when surgery is required for a broken bone, it's because there's been some sort of movement where the bone is now out of place and it's not articulating with the other side that it has broken off. So that's certainly a good sign. As far as his recovery goes, we're looking at really the only thing that needs to happen here is his bones just need to heal. So where the fracture is, just needs to kind of heal and form back together, and then he'll begin a return to football type regimen. So, Jared, was he placed on IR?
He was not, that I know of at this point in time.
Okay.
But we can talk through that a little bit in case he was. I don't believe they actually ended up doing that just yet.
Okay, so if he was not placed on IR, then this is probably going to be a 4 to 6 week type deal. I would guess, and just from what we've seen clinically with this type of injury, is that'd be more towards a 6 week side of things. We just need to make sure, again, that the bone is completely healed. They'll do repeat x-rays every couple of weeks to make sure bone healing is occurring as it should, and then he'll just have to get back into a normal strength training regimen. So the no surgery route, if that ends up being the case, is certainly good news for Njoku and leaves the door wide open for him to be able to return this season and return without limitation. If he were to have some sort of complication and the bone healing is maybe going a little bit slower than what we typically see, or it's not healing in the fashion that they need it to, then this could potentially progress to a surgical situation. But as of right now, it's good news for Njoku, no surgery, with really the only barrier for him just being time and just allowing that bone to heal. And if everything goes according to plan, he'll be able to return without restriction.
And that's something, just folks, just to tell you how amazing I think the human body is. The bone broke. It's broke. Right? There's some level of split between itself and itself. Much like you would cut a carrot, right, and then put it next to each other. So the no surgery means that, again, think if you cut a carrot straight, it doesn't roll away. They're still in the same spot, kind of thing. But magically, and I know it's not magic, it's science and it's all of those kind of things, it's biology, but magically that is going to heal itself, is what we're hearing if there is no surgery. So obviously he's got to keep it kind of still and all of those kind of things. But just to think about how amazing the human body and all that Dr. Bowers does and has studied, how great it is that our body is just able to heal something. That's like a tree getting a branch getting broken half, laying next to itself for a while and automatically healing itself and just coming
Hmm.
back together. Like that's just an amazing thing that our human body is able to do. And so obviously the good news is it sounds like a shorter issue than a longer issue, still 6 weeks and getting all the strength and all that kind of stuff. But it sounds like good news comparable to what could have been, because surgery most likely would have led to the IR, which is going to be 8, 9, 10 weeks out, and whatever that looks like for the team. So that's good news. So Kirksey, maybe not as good of news. David and Njoku, again, if everything we currently hear is true, no surgery. We're looking forward to 6 weeks, more likely closer to that 6 weeks. The good thing is very young. And so younger people tend to heal quicker, unlike people like myself. We tend to take a little bit longer to heal. Is that, I just want to make sure I'm confirming with you, you're the guy that does it. Is that pretty accurate just in generalities? Younger people heal quicker than older people.
It is true. I mean, as we age, our healing process and the biology within inside of our body tends to slow down, and our bodies aren't quite as resilient as they once were. So when we're looking at in the NFL, maybe at a David Njoku versus somebody who's been around in the league a little bit longer, maybe 10 years older, I wouldn't expect to see that big of a healing gap. But when you start to spread things out here and looking at maybe a 24 or 25-year-old compared to somebody who's 40 or 50, then that's when we really start to see this difference start to take place. So everybody in the league should be healing at about the same rate. But it's when you get beyond that, the post-professional and the retired life for these guys in the NFL, where we start to see some of these differences in healing time compared to their younger, more active, and still playing football counterparts.
Awesome, perfect. Well, we're gonna end kind of our conversation today with a lot, because we're gonna end talking about the secondary, which last week against the Rams, four starters in the secondary joining Christian Kirksey and being out for the game. So we'll start with kind of what I find the most interesting one. The rest are more interesting to others, but I'm the mental health guy. So Demarius Randall goes out with a concussion after week one, and it seemed like a really interesting timeline where he reported to the team that he started to have these symptoms. So could you help people understand, what does it look like when someone suffers a concussion, in the timeline and some of those kind of things? Because we didn't have Randall for 2 weeks because of this concussion that kind of surfaced after week one.
Yeah, when we're dealing with a concussion, Jared, it's a form of a mild traumatic brain injury. So these typically occur as a result of a blow to the head via helmet-to-helmet contact, or maybe the hitting of the head very forcefully on the ground. And what that causes is a disruption of the physiologic processes within inside the brain. And so these complexes that are normally occurring inside the brain then become altered, and we get some chemical imbalances that occur within inside the brain. In typical cases, in individuals who sustain a concussion for the first time in sports, we can see players return as quickly as 7 to 10 days. So they're very high return to play rate without much complication. When we get these guys who have repeat concussions, is when we can get into a longer return to play timetable and becomes more of an issue. These guys will have difficulties with vision, with light sensitivity, with balance, and so there's a variety of different things with thought processing, a variety of things that play into this when a concussion happens that I don't think a lot of people realize. It's a very real injury, and thankfully over the course of the past decade or so, we're seeing this injury being taken a lot more seriously in sports, in professional football especially. We see guys down the line who have dealt with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that's CTE, which is a very advanced and progressed stage of this, that's not detectable until after somebody's passed away. So it's good that the NFL is getting a grip on this now, and they're no longer following the oh, you just got your bell rung, get back out there mentality. So it's a very serious injury, and they should all be treated very delicately in order to do its best for the football player to get them back onto the field safely and effectively.
And so Randall, if he is cleared, which it looks like today he was cleared, Is there any concerns of any lingering issues? Obviously, you talked about if someone has multiple concussions, they can be more susceptible, those kind of things. But is there any lingering concerns if he has been cleared to participate, like we have when someone has a sprained ankle and those kind of things with a concussion?
If he's been cleared by any team in the NFL, or whether he's playing for the Browns or the Chargers or what have you, the NFL return to sport protocol following concussion follows a very regimented order. Okay. And so these guys aren't going to be able to return to play unless they're able to check every single box along this protocol. So, being that he is cleared, I am 100% confident that he'll be ready to go and he shouldn't show any ill effects as a result of his concussion because he's cleared every stage, which checks every anatomic and physiologic box you can possible. Now, as we discussed here just a little bit ago, he is at a higher risk for a subsequent concussion via another blow to the head or maybe a shoulder to the head or a head to the turf. But as of right now, if he's been cleared, which it sounds like he has, then he shouldn't have any deficits as he makes his return here for the Browns in week 4.
That's good news. And I'll just share a quick personal story. I was a youth who threw his body around and did a lot of silly things. So I can't tell you how many concussions I have. I can thank my brother for one of them, where he took a metal baseball bat to the back of my head. That was a fun
Oof.
one at a very young age. And then he carried me home to my parents.
Well, at least that was nice of him.
Yeah, it was. I don't think he really meant it, but he was annoyed by me. I was his little brother, 5 years younger. But I also remember one where I was in high school, and the reason there's details that I remember, and there's other things that I don't remember at all. The details I remember is Jared Wright was pitching, and I think it was the World Series. It was definitely the playoffs. I was watching that from a hospital bed because I was on the back of a truck waiting to run cross country, and the coach told us it was time to go. The person driving the truck thought we all got out. None of us had moved. And I went flying off the back, landed on my back, and then my head hit a speed bump. And then my buddy landed on top of me.
Oh my
My coach
goodness.
told me to go run laps, right? So I didn't get to go street run, but he told me to go run laps. And so that was back in, I don't know, 97, 98, somewhere in that area, to tell you kind of where it wasn't just football, right? Or basketball or any of soccer. It was even in cross country. I mean, the coach saw it happen and it was painful and I was vomiting, and concussions can be pretty traumatic. And so when you think of them as mild traumatic brain trauma, I think we start to respect them more than just the word concussion, or bell rung. So just from my experience of having that happen and remembering what that was like to feel uncertain, and that was back when it was you're not allowed to go back, you're not allowed to go to sleep, so I had to stay awake. All of those things that can create a lot of uncertainty, and so it's good to hear that Randall shouldn't have any concerns moving forward, at least this week. Obviously, more susceptible to another concussion. Moving on to his partners in the secondary, so we had two that had hamstring issues and one that had a thigh issue. I think in the NFL, we're used to hamstrings. We'll still talk about them there in a second. But could you help just kind of understand, is there a significant difference between the thigh and the hamstring and what those injuries are like, especially kind of focusing on what a thigh injury can look like for NFL players, especially in the secondary for Morgan Burnett?
In terms of what they actually are, the pathophysiology or what's actually happening with the injury is the same, hamstring versus thigh. And what I mean by that is it's an overstretch of the muscle and the muscle group. So hamstring obviously located on the backside of the thigh, and then when we hear the term thigh thrown around, it's usually referring to a quad injury or that muscle group that sits on the front of the thigh. When these muscles become overstretched past their anatomic threshold, we can get a slight overstretch of the muscle, which is a grade 1 injury, partial tearing of the muscle, which is a grade 2 injury, and a complete rupture or complete tearing of the muscle, which oftentimes always requires surgery, is a grade 3 injury. And so majority of the time we do see hamstring injuries, as you mentioned, Jared, and this is just due to the fact that the hamstring helps to decelerate the leg, the lower leg specifically, while running and changing direction, whereas the thigh doesn't really have that big of a role with that type of thing. But the injuries are very similar in that they both involve overstretch, partial tearing, or complete tearing of the muscle, with hamstring injuries being a little bit more prevalent than thigh injuries.
Gotcha. So it's one of the questions we actually got on Twitter is really wondering, all of a sudden, This all seemed to kind of pop up on Friday. Is there anything about that that could create any concerns about these players' preparation, nutrition? Is there anything about the fact that all of a sudden three players are having hamstring and thigh issues just kind of crop up? Is there anything about that that could or should lead to a change in preparation for Ward, Williams, Burnett, and how maybe the Browns deal with the secondary players?
I think being that it was just a handful of guys over the course of a 53-man roster, I'm not too overly concerned with how they are being managed and that they all just popped up on Friday. I think it's more coincidental than anything. Something worth noting in this situation that I mean, really all athletes should be doing. There's an exercise out there called the Nordic hamstring curl, where essentially you are kneeling on your knees with somebody holding onto your lower legs or your legs fixed on something, and then you essentially fall towards the floor and just hang on with your hamstrings as tight as you can until you can't hold on anymore. Then you end up all the way on the ground. The reason I bring that up is that exercise has actually been shown to reduce the incidence of hamstring injuries by up to 60%. And so, from a preventative side of things, there is a secret potion, more or less, or a key to reduce these injuries. And again, I don't have any information about how these teams are training or if this is part of their training regimen, but this exercise was initially developed in Europe and has shown fantastic success at reducing injuries. So if the Browns aren't doing this and if NFL teams aren't doing this, then they really need to work it in. I mean, it doesn't take much out of their training time. You can bang out 30 of these in 90 seconds or so and then move right on with it, and you've reduced your risk for injury. So I think the injuries to the Browns secondary is merely coincidental at this time, but the Nordic hamstring curl is definitely something that all teams should incorporate to their training regimen.
So folks, if you are an athlete, know an athlete, the Nordic hamstring curl, and the best way I can describe it is if you remember back in the day, Michael Jackson used to do that thing where he would lean and look like he was going to fall over, but he was standing up. It's kind of that, except you're on your knees and someone's holding your back legs, so your legs don't move, but you're using your body weight. I don't know if it's the correct term, but when I lift, I call them a negative, which is not when I'm pushing the bench up, but it's kind of that slow down. Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
similar in that way where you're slowly using those muscles. In this case, this is your hamstring, and then you need a partner, right? So that's where community and people come together and really can be helpful. So make sure that if you are an athlete, that you focus on that Nordic hamstring curl. That can be really helpful for you. But it sounds like not really worried about, in particular, that these things popped up. Would it be fair to say, though, you talked about the hamstring kind of helping decelerate and the movement of the lower part of the leg. Is it fair to say that hamstring issues are more likely for some of the skill players who are doing a lot of that stopping and starting? Again, cornerbacks, wide receivers, running back safeties, those kind of things. Are those more likely injuries because of the amount of movement and the type of movement some of those specialty players are having?
Absolutely. I mean, just think for a second. When's the last time you heard an offensive, defensive lineman with a hamstring injury, or a quarterback, for instance? I mean, you really do. All you ever hear is defensive back, safety, cornerback, linebacker on occasion, and then your skill players on offense, your running backs and wide receivers. And it is due to that sudden change of direction, having to work at explosive speeds, put on the brakes, and then go a different way. And if the muscle is not strong enough to adequately decelerate, when you're going into that turn or change of direction, that's when you see these things happen. The other instance that you can see these things happen is if you see a guy, you see him a lot in baseball, guys running to first base who overstride and try and get that last ditch step to try and reach first base, and then the hamstring gets overstretched in that situation as well. So that can happen in straight line situations as well as change of direction, but it definitely is more so the skill position players in football than anybody else.
Gotcha. So it looks like we know that we think Randall is back from his concussion. Looks like Morgan Burnett's thigh is not a big issue. The fact that Denzel, so here's kind of that final question. Denzel Ward, we knew probably on Friday was going to be out. We thought Greedy Williams, all the way up until maybe the inactives, we thought Greedy Williams was going to play. Is there anything about the time frame? I'm sorry, with Ward, it was more Saturday. My timing's a little off on this. Is there anything about the timing that we thought it was possible for Williams to play even into game day, and then that Ward had a chance to play? Does that mean anything to recovery, or is it possible this could linger even though both of them were just questionable for Sunday night?
I really think the team was just doing their due diligence here and just trying to be extra cautious. With these soft tissue injuries early on in the season, you want to see teams take a conservative route. Could Ward and could have Williams played this week? I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that they could have played. Okay, now questions then come about their effectiveness. Are they going to be able to do their job as a defensive back? Are they going to be able to keep up with wide receivers like Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks for the Rams? Probably not. So these guys could have played, which I think is why they drew that questionable designation. But really, with the big picture in mind, we're only week 3 headed into week 4 of the NFL season. You got 2 dynamic cornerbacks that you need for the long haul. So they're just playing it cautious here, and I would expect to see them back hopefully over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And so this week against the Ravens, if everybody's back or most of them are back, obviously the Browns win. They're tied for first place with the Ravens in the AFC North, so a big game. And so if they're just being cautious, maybe they're a little less cautious and have more time coming into this week 4 matchup with the Ravens with their dynamic offense, with Lamar Jackson running all over the place and his improved passing. And so the hope is that the Browns will see most or all of their secondary back. Good news, at least we think, on David Njoku, and that around 6 weeks or so he should be returning if he does not end up needing surgery. And then Christian Kirksey, unfortunately, unlikely to return this year. And based on everything that we know, it seems like it's unlikely that he suits up for the Browns again, which is a sad thing if you get attached to players like most of us do. So, Dr. Bowers, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. I want to spend a few minutes talking about all the different places people can engage with you. So first, on Twitter, we are at BL Bowers. That's Bowers. So BL Bowers 12 on Twitter. And then if you are looking to read his work, you can go to sportsline.com. And a lot of that work is then also brought over to CBS Sports. And then the fantasydoctors.com. And then because that's where you work full time, I'm going to say if any of you or your family are looking for any type of physical therapy services, I know Athletico has a few offices all over the place, including over here near me in Dayton, where Dr. Bowers is in Columbus, over in Indianapolis, all of that. And so to find a place there, you can go to Athletico. That's literally athletic with an O.com. So again, find Dr. Bowers on Twitter at sportsline.com, thefantasydoctors.com. And if you need any help, Athletico is here for you. Dr. Bowers, Brandon, thank you for coming on tonight. Appreciate your time and all of your expertise, man.
Yeah, Jared, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm always available if you need me again in the future. Hopefully you don't, because it's always a sore subject to talk about with injuries to our Cleveland Brownies, but that's my area of expertise and wheelhouse. So if you ever need anything again in the future, just feel free to reach out.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Take care.
All right. So again, thank you to Brandon Bowers, Dr. Bowers. Again, make sure you follow him on Twitter at BLBowers12. Go to sportsline.com, thefantasydoctors.com, because I know many of you love fantasy football. So again, sportsline.com, thefantasydoctors.com. And then if you are in need of any type of care that Athletico can take care of, get a hold of them. Check them out online, athletico.com. So, all right. Browns fans, we are on to the Ratbirds this week. So the Browns face off with Baltimore, and if they win, again, they're tied with the Ravens for first place in the AFC North. And while the season hasn't started off great, again, I've been really clear with you that the Browns just need a couple victories here, right? 1 or 2 victories here. Can they beat the Ravens? Can they beat the Ratbirds? Can they get one against the Niners going out west? Can they take advantage of the Seahawks somehow? Can they take advantage of the fact that the Patriots, they'll be getting the Patriots when the Browns are coming off a bye week? 1 or 2 wins can make a difference, because the end of this schedule is setting up real pretty, folks. And the way the 49ers played last week, not a lot of confidence in them. The Ratbirds are still the Ratbirds. We don't like them. Seattle, Russell Wilson, everything they've got going on is a good team. Jadeveon Clowney getting adjusted. Thankfully, they won't have Jaron Reed. And then obviously the Patriots are the Patriots. Let's see how they do. The good news is, as Dr. Bowers talked, we are likely to see Demarius Randall, Morgan Burnett, and even possibly or likely to see Greedy Williams and Denzel Ward return this week. So we are on to Baltimore, folks. We're on to this game that is really, really important. So let's see what happens. Browns are 1-2. It's a tough loss. It was a loss. It was a tough loss because we didn't think it was going to be close, and it became far closer than we expected. We know the injuries played a role. We'll see how they impact us going forward. Thanks for stopping by. Again, thank you to Dr. Bowers and Athletico and all the folks that he works with. Thanks for stopping by. The OBR Straight Talk podcast. You can get a hold of me on Twitter at Jared K. Mueller. That's JaredKMueller. And go Browns.